thinking to the past in some of the sessions, the earlier sessions on BCI and where we've come and where we still need to go, I was just thinking about that BCI panel and how much money they raised now. So to put it into perspective, I don't know how many of you were around or thinking about BCI back in 2004, 2005, but Cyberkinetics was, the first company to really get into humans, into the brain. There were other, what we call BCIs. And if you remember then, they raised, and I was part of Cyberkinetics, $60-70 million back in 2005. And I mean, put that into perspective, and it, incredible accomplishments. Really met some crazy milestones of patients getting implanted and success stories that have led through these years. But when they talk about 1.2 billion, and that's 4 companies, and that's not enough, that was 70 million. I mean, no wonder it didn't get to where we really needed to get to for, commercial adoption. So, but that was my story in BCI, BlackRock Microsystems, BlackRock Neuromed, exiting that. I had a little bit of a hiatus into some other technology that I'd love to talk about. It's a whole different arena, but it was a great experience. And I'm just excited to be back in this space, back in the neurotech space, back with Jim, back with this crowd. The company that I'm running now is NeurologicSolutions, and we are, this is another huge difference for me. This is just a software company. And I am so happy to say that. I mean, everyone almost in this room now, we're talking about devices, implantables. I've done that. I get it. Nothing in this world is easy. That's incredibly difficult. And software alone is a lot easier. When we talk about fundraising, I'll get into it. It's a different story. It's a different order of magnitude. It's a different order of magnitude from timing and money and all that kind of stuff. So I'm excited to be here with a bit of a different perspective. We are working on epilepsy. Everyone knows about epilepsy. This isn't a new story. There's all kinds of different treatments for it. Where we're coming from is now epilepsy diagnostics, and I'll get into a little bit of what our secret sauce is and why this is important. Everyone knows this story about FlowJo and what happened there. What I just want to reiterate is that was a false negative misdiagnosis, which led to a much more conservative standard of care, which I still believe we're in today, which is if patients present themselves with symptoms of epilepsy, with seizures, clinicians tend to going to say, you have epilepsy or something, we need to do something. We need to start treating you. So we're going to treat you with ASMs, anti-seizure medication, or something else. I'm going to call it epilepsy very early on because we don't want that to happen. And so this is part of the drive of where we are, is to say, hey, can we actually develop a better solution for identifying epilepsy as early on? This isn't new news. Again, anyone that's in this field knows how prevalent it is, how many onsets of seizures or epilepsy patients we have, and how much of a problem it is. And that's the real big piece, this 30% misdiagnosis rate, because clinicians still today don't have enough information to truly know, A, what epilepsy is, and B, how to diagnose it appropriately with this patient population. So again, this is what we do today. We're going to try to look at any history. We're going to look at all of the symptoms. We may try to image them. We're going to do an EEG at that first visit. Now, there's tons of new technology out there for ambulatory, mobile kind of EEG, but it's then what do we do with that data, and how can we, A, access it, and B, analyze it in a way that's going to be meaningful and actually have an impact to these patients. This is our secret sauce. And this is what I believe there aren't very many companies that are looking at it this way. Today, the way that EEG is used is to say, we need this patient to have epileptic activity. So epileptic activity within the EEG, but seizure-like activity. This is the whole, why do we have an EMU? Why do we bring these patients in? Why do we use that photic stimulator? Why do we say, get off your drugs, stay on your drugs, do this, make sure it's normal, make sure it's not normal? We want them to have seizures because we believe that's the only way we can see the seizure activity in the EEG. What we believe with this algorithm, and this was developed out of Dr. Sridevi Sarma at Johns Hopkins University, and she comes from a more analytic math kind of background to try to say, maybe there's something different in this data. Maybe there is something that we can uncover in, and the most important piece here is a normal EEG. So some of these patients, we know this, they come into the doctor and they had seizures or some kind of these symptoms. They give them an EEG and they're like, well, it's normal. Like the EEG isn't telling us anything right now. We now believe we can actually pick out of a normal EEG, a 20, 30-minute routine EEG, data that's important enough to actually give us an indication of whether it's epilepsy or not. So again, one of the hypotheses that we have that I've heard here as well a lot is an epileptic brain is an epileptic brain all the time. It's not just when you're having seizures. It's not just when you're having these episodes. And so even normal EEG, there should be something there because you still have epilepsy, if in fact you do have epilepsy. And this is all the work that Sri and her team have done to try to figure out what are these networks doing, what's happening with these networks, these nodes in a routine EEG that we might be able to pick up on. And we talk about it as the brain is in some stable state and a diseased brain is different. And if we can pick up what these feature sets are of these differences and where they're coming from and how they're impacting other nodes or regions of the brain, we can then call that a signature of epilepsy. And by the way, we believe there's all kinds of other signatures for other disease states that we could talk about as well. So what does our product look like today? Well, it's take a 10 to 20 minute EEG recording, process it through this product that we call Episcalp, and give you a risk score. Some kind of a number between 0 and 100, and very low means a very low likelihood of epilepsy, very high means a high likelihood of epilepsy. Again, unfortunately, in this space, we know this, nothing's perfect, and it's never going to be because we're dealing with this crazy thing of the human body, which is why we're going to give you more of a range. And how did we start to validate this study and kind of where are we? We did a retrospective study of 200 patients. And so every dot on here represents a patient. All of these patients were diagnosed with epilepsy. So every one of these at their first visit was diagnosed with epilepsy and had a normal EEG. So clinicians in the room, if you're a neurologist or epileptologist, you would have looked at it and been like, yep, nothing here. This looks normal. Let's figure out what we're going to do. Normal EEG and diagnosed with epilepsy. When we ran it through our product Episcalp, this is the separation that we had. And we were able to say, put all of those blue dots as, so the blue dots on the right, after many years of diagnosing and treating these patients, and if you're familiar with the process, unfortunately, it takes so long, the clinicians were able to say, you know what, you actually don't have epilepsy. You have something else, and we're still going to try to figure out what it is. That's the blue dots. The red dots were confirmed epilepsy. And you can see the separation that we were able to then define at that very first visit. And so we talk about it as, the initial misdiagnosis rate was 54%. That was when they said all of these patients have epilepsy. With our technology, we now drop that down to 17%. So obviously there's still work to be done, but a remarkable change and a remarkable impact for some patients if they can have that first visit and say, you know what, definitively, I actually do have epilepsy, and let's move to, we've talked about a lot of the treatments that are available today. Let's get that sooner. Let's get that in place as quickly as we can. Maybe it is surgery, maybe it is a drug, maybe it's a different kind of a drug, or maybe even more importantly, you don't have epilepsy and you don't have to go through these 2 or 3 years on all of these drugs with all these side effects because it's something else that we're actually going after. And that's the real power behind this. Some of the improvements or, what differentiates us, we've already talked about this. It's really getting to that diagnosis as quickly as we can, getting to that right treatment. We'd like this to become more of a universal score, and people talk about, what was your Episcalp score for epilepsy, so we can all be on the same page and understanding what true diagnosis is going to look like. Let's become more efficient in the EMU. Any of you that work in the EMU or are impacted by it, you've seen what that process is like, and so many patients that go into the EMU thinking we have epilepsy and come out and they don't, and they still don't. A, they don't know what it is, and it's really frustrating for the patients. B, they're taking up time, space, and beds from other patients that could be treated in the EMU that have epilepsy. Competitive analysis, this is really just to say no one else is really looking at the data the same way that we are, I don't believe. But I'd love to talk to other people that are and learn from other people how we can actually work together to really enhance this. Our whole thing is about, we want to look at, quote, normal data and be able to tell you of epilepsy, as opposed to looking for the signatures in epileptic discharges or, what other abnormalities we're used to looking at. we're a very different company. The other kind of nice piece for us that we believe in, and we're still early, so we're still doing work on this, is there are some CPT codes available, we believe, for this kind of technology that are not being used today. We're undergoing some significant studies right now to really confirm that and figure out if that is the case. And that will, impact our commercialization strategy. In terms of the market, this is pretty well established. There are lots of EEGs that are done around the world, 10 to 25 million per year, a lot related to epilepsy. There's a huge opportunity to run this software on a lot of EEGs and help these patients. For us, our initial approach is going to be in the US. We have a lot of connections and networks to the top epilepsy centers around the country, the level 3, level 4 epilepsy centers. We're going to be embarking on a study, and we'll sort of talk about that in the next slide, at 3 centers to really increase the number of patients that we're running. Yes, I've got my typical sort of hockey stick curve for revenue, which is meaningless. We know that. But the piece that I do want to highlight here is we do have a couple different options for commercialization. As I mentioned, there's a potential CPT code here with reimbursement associated with it, which would be great to get on a pay-per-use kind of model. Initially, even if that's not there in time, I believe there's a licensing opportunity, and I can go through what that model looks like for the hospital. We can show how much money they're going to be able to save by getting, and someone used this earlier, the right patients, the right treatment at the right time. And we're just a component of that. And if we can really prove that value, that's worth something. And hospitals will be willing to pay that. And I think there's an early licensing model for us that we're going to be looking to exploit. So timeline and sort of the fundraising kind of pitch. As I just hinted to, we just embarked on a new study, SBIR phase 2 grant, which is fantastic, for $3 million over the next couple of years. At Jefferson Hospital, Johns Hopkins, and University of Maryland Medical Center, we're going to be doing some prospective study-ish. I mean, everything we're really doing is, instant retrospective, but that's a different story. To do 1,200 patients and continue to validate this algorithm, improve that at that very first EEG, how accurate we can be with that diagnosis as compared to the treating clinician, how that diagnosis changes over time. That's the first goal. The rest of it really is around those commercialization activities that need to happen with our quality system, with regulatory, with reimbursement, with distribution, with sales channel, with partnership opportunities. Our total raise that we're looking for is $8 million. We've got the first $3 million from that SBIR, looking for an additional $5 million to be able to really start commercializing in 27 and looking into 28. Very small team, as I mentioned. It was started out at Johns Hopkins with Dr. Sridevi Sarma. Big clinical input from Dr. Gonzalez at UPMC. I'm the CEO, and I have 2 engineers, and that's it. But I love it that we can get so much done with this small team and this relatively small amount of money. It's just a whole different world, and so excited to see what we can do in these next couple of years.
Great, thank you, Andy. Great talk. I noticed that you have BlackRock NeuroMed up there. Do you want to just say a couple words about what the status is of BlackRock NeuroMed?
Well, so BlackRock NeuroMed doesn't exist anymore. That was the EEG company we spun out of BlackRock Microsystems and had an exit. We sold to Natus back in 2017, and those familiar with the space, Natus tends to
buy everyone up.
Or aggregate this industry, but yes, growth by acquisition, they're really good at it. So we were able to benefit from that.
Which raises my first question, is how soon before Natus buys you up?
So I'm going to say, unfortunately, they're not going to care. This is the wrong thing to say. I don't know. They care about the money and the business. They don't really see the value as much of the impact that this has, I don't think, to the hospital. So what are they going to look at? They're not going to care about me until I'm impacting their sales or can help their sales. And so I've got to be selling this at some level that they can acquire, and they don't pay very big multiples. For any of you that have interacted with Natus and sort of this industry, I think there's better opportunities, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It would be right for them. I think it could help them. They're the kind of company that's in this space. I think there's going to be other opportunities. And we've heard it here when we talk about brain health and the applications and where that's going. That's where I think we're going. And I think there'll be some other companies that we'll have better synergies with, and it'll be a better opportunity. And I'll lead into what might be your next question too, which is, classic question for us. Are we really a company, or are we more of a product or a project? And right now, I'd say we clearly look like just a product, right? I mean, from everything that you've seen, which might be the case. And that's why we are having conversations with strategics, other bigger companies. Where do we fit in? How can we benefit each other? And I imagine a couple of years from now, we'll look a little different.
Okay. So my next question is, are you really a company, or are you, oh, wait, no, you okay, we have some questions.
Hello. There are several different types of epilepsies. So I'm wondering if this is particularly good for diagnosing some epilepsies over other epilepsies, or having this distinction.
So we're getting there. I don't have a definitive answer yet. And part of this next study on the 1,200 patients that we're embarking on is going to help differentiate that, because you're absolutely right. There are, and how well do we do on focal epilepsy as opposed to others is going to be important. And so we started to see some separation, but we need bigger numbers to really present that data.
Have fun parting the epilepsies.
Hey,
Our poet laureate.
Sure. Okay with that? All right. Thank you. Oh, you need to come with me more often.
She doesn't know this, but we're going to conclude the day with a poetry slam. So
What's the youngest age that you think you will get down to?
Well, so in this study, it's limited to 18 and above right now, but we know we can go younger and are going to need to, and we will. And there's lots of other disease states that we're going to start looking into. So one of the nice things, again, it's software. And if we can have access to the data, we can do this so quickly. So we will do a lot of that testing on our own initially before we do studies with it. But unfortunately, right now it's 18 and above.
I think
Sure.
I was going to ask about, what about like longitudinal management? Patients who, are successful with a drug regimen, and then, after 6-8 years break through an early signal that they were coming upon a breakthrough and needed a drug change regimen would be, I think a very big market opportunity too.
Well, and so I'm going to tie that into the earlier question-ish that we were talking with Jim with partnerships. And would drug companies be interested in this technology to be able to preempt that and answer that question and help them? I think the answer to that is yes. In terms of where we're at to give answers right now, that's part of what we're going to look at in this next study, is do a better job of understanding where the patients are at what we call day one with their drug regimen, where they are. And so we're monitoring every 6 months, 6, 12, 18, 24 months, which is good, but doesn't cover everything. And what has happened? What is our data saying? What drugs are they on or off? And what does it mean? So I don't have an answer yet, but that's part of what we're going to continue to look at.
all right, great. Well, thank you very much, Andy. Great presentation.